Hello, my name's Aviva, and today I wanted to share with you guys the steamiest books that I read this year. So it might just be me, but I feel like in general, the book community kind of like pivoted towards dark and steamy romances this year. And a lot of people are kind of like growing out of like the classic YA fantasy and like the cutesy romances sort of thing. So let me know if you're with me on this, that like you're kind of like growing up and your taste has changed this year. But my taste has definitely changed slowly throughout the year. And I feel like in the second half of the year, I started to read a lot more of the dark and steamy romances. So today I wanted to share with you all of the books that I found from this little niche of sorts that I really enjoyed. Before I get started though, I just wanted to like put it out there that this is in no particular order whatsoever. And also all of these books, the steam and all of that sort of stuff kind of, go up and down. I kind of just chose books that in my head, I remember as being more steamy than the general like cute rom-com, and that maybe there are some like darker topics talked about in some of these. So I'm not going to mention any trigger warnings or anything like that, but make sure to, look up these books before you start reading them in case you do have any trigger warnings. But my point is that, some are steamier than others, and I'll try to, point it out when I can remember something specific. But for the most part, these are just like angst-filled, tension-filled, non-fade to black sort of romances. First up, I have Make It Sweet by Kristen Callahan. So in this book, you are following two POVs. You are following this guy who is an ex-hockey player. He recently got injured and he kind of was told that he has to quit playing or else like he could really die. And then you're following this girl who just got kicked off of this television show. She was kind of like the Khaleesi of Game of Thrones sort of vibe, and they just killed off her character. And at the same time, she found out that her boyfriend has been cheating on her. So she's not having a great time, and she decides that she's going to go to this like relaxation place. She just has to take a breather and she's going to kind of get away for a bit. So she goes to this like, it's not a rehab, but it's like some sort of like, I don't know, sanctuary of sorts. And basically when she gets there, she meets this guy, that's the ex-hockey player, because he lives on the property because his grandmother owns the place. And basically they're kind of both like dealing with their own stuff, but they're living on the same estate. So they keep bumping into each other and like, they're obviously very attracted to each other and they can't seem to stay away. And it's a great time. Next, I have Enemies by Tajan, which is a college football romance. You're basically following this girl who recently moved out of state to go to like the specific program that this college had that she was really interested in. And she basically doesn't know anybody at all, but she does happen to somewhat know this pro football player who is a pro player in the same state that she is in. And her parents kind of keep bugging her and are being like, you should really contact him because, you guys used to be great friends because they grew up with each other. They used to be really good friends, and then like puberty hit, and then all of a sudden they hated each other and now they don't talk anymore. And basically like, both of their parents are kind of on their backs being like, here are each other's numbers, get to know each other. You're both living out of state and you literally know no one else but each other. And they're kind of like, I have no interest in speaking with her. No. And then happens to be something happens in this girl's life and nobody can get a hold of her. So this guy kind of like takes it upon himself to track her down and let her know what happened. And then the story kind of takes off from there in a direction that personally I didn't see coming, but in a really good way. And anyway, it's a great time. I'm almost positive this is a dual POV also, but I could be wrong. I think it is. But anyway, it's a great time. I highly recommend it, especially if you're into like sports romances that happen to be like, taking place in college. Next, I have Bossman by V. Keeland, which was such a great read. I remember when I was reading this book, I literally just didn't want to put it down. You're basically following this girl who, the book kind of starts off where she's on a date and she's really not enjoying it. So she kind of like gets up, goes to the bathroom and like calls her friend and being like, give me one of those calls in like 5 minutes of like, to get me out of my date of sorts. And happens to be this guy overhears her and starts like messing with her and being really mean and being like, it's a really hard restaurant to like get a reservation at. And like, you're being like kind of a bitch and stuff. And she's like, who the hell do you think you are? Don't like listen into my, private conversation. And then she goes back to her table. And what do you know? This guy all of a sudden like comes over, sits next to her and pretends that they know each other. And then like, he kind of like crashes her date. And she's like, what the hell just happened? And then it's like, they just like, they all go in their separate ways. And like a month later, they kind of bump into each other again. And for whatever circumstances, it kind of just works works out that he ends up being her boss. And they really didn't start off on great terms, and then it goes from there. So this is like a workplace environment. It's really steamy. It's better than I'm even explaining it. I highly recommend reading this one. Next up, I have Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, which I kind of have mixed feelings about, but let me just explain. This is a very taboo book. It is an age gap romance. You're following this girl who ends up moving in with her boyfriend and her boyfriend's father, and she ends up having a romance with her boyfriend's father. She is 19, he is 37, and that is all I need to know about the book. I couldn't put this book down when I was reading it. It was a dual POV. It was very entertaining. I literally just kept wanting to flip the page. But at the same time, I was a little bit uncomfortable by the tabooness of this book and the age gap. So usually I'm fine with age gaps and I don't really get bothered by it or find them super weird. But in this book specifically, it made me a little bit uncomfortable. But at the same time, this was one of the steamiest books I read this year. And I know that so many people absolutely love this book. And not everybody would be as weirded out about the age gap that I was. So I really wanted to mention it in this video. But if you want to know a little bit more of detail of why I didn't love this book, I'm going to make sure that the review that I made on this book is linked in the description below. But in general, this is a very steamy book that a lot of people love. I think I even gave it like 4 stars while I was reading it, because even though it made me a little bit uncomfortable, it was still an amazing read. So take from that what you will. And then on the exact same note, I have Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. I made another review about this book and I kind of explained what made me a little bit uncomfortable about the read. So again, that's going to be linked down below. But in general, this was a really fun, unputdownable, kept wanting to flip the page sort of steamy read. You're following these 2 people that have been pen pals like since they were little kids in school. They kind of got, set up by their teachers sort of thing. And they have been best friends ever since. They share everything with each other. And now they're older. They're in like their senior year of high school or something. And the guy runs into the girl and realizes who she is. And she doesn't realize who he is. And he basically doesn't like what he sees. He feels like he's been lied to this whole time. So he kind of stops writing her letters. And she's like, what the hell did I do? All of a sudden, I'm like not getting letters from him anymore. Like, what the hell happened? And then it's a couple of months later and he all of a sudden shows up at her school and starts bullying the hell out of her, and she doesn't know who he is, but obviously he is well aware of who she is, and the story, it just takes off from there. So this is a bully romance that also happens to be a pen pal romance, and while it was really amazing and really steamy, again, I was a little bit uncomfortable by the bulliness of it. I thought that at points it went a little bit too far and was a little bit too intense for me. But again, it's one of the most popular books out there this year. Like, I've been seeing it all over the place, and I know that so many people love it. And I loved it myself. I still gave it 4 stars because I thoroughly enjoyed reading it in the moment. But then after the fact, I was like, I think I was a little bit uncomfortable and I didn't love it so much. But I still had to recommend it because it was a really good steamy read that I know a ton of people will absolutely love. Next up, I have The Club Trilogy by Lauren Rose. So this is actually the first book in a 3/4 book full series. You can't just read the first book. If you're going to read the first book, you got to read the rest of it. There's basically 2 more books after this, and then there is a full-on epilogue book. So that's why it's like 3/4. But my point is that this is probably the steamiest book that I read this year that is basically in this stack. Like, without a doubt, this was very, very, very steamy. You're basically following this guy who at the beginning of the book decides to sign up for this sex club. So he fills out this entire application about basically exactly what he's looking for in a sexual partner. And then this girl who happens to work for the company that he's applying, to be a sex person for, basically reads his application because she's the one who processes it. And then she sees some stuff that she feels like she has to message him back about. And then she sends him like an anonymous email, basically answering to his application. And then the story kind of takes off from there and they have a very interesting romance. So that's all I'm going to say about this book, but the series and the story in general definitely takes a lot of twists and turns that I didn't see coming. And while this was one of the steamiest books that I read this year, it also had an amazing plot. And usually I'm all about like, you know, if you're gonna give me the steam, you gotta give me the plot, the tension, and the build up also. And this book definitely delivered on that end. Next up, I have the Maid series by Danielle Laurie. So I'm holding up The Sweetest Oblivion, which is the first book in the series, but there's also The Maddest Obsession, which is book 2, and then The Darkest Temptation, which is book 3. And I do know that book 4 is currently in the works. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but there is going to be a 4th book. And this is basically a mafia romance companion series. And in the first book, you're following an arranged marriage. In the second book, you're following, you know what, I don't even know what I would consider it, maybe like stalker-ish somewhat vibes. And then in the third book, it's a kidnapping romance that is like Stockholm Syndrome vibes. So all of these books are so amazing. They are very dark, very trigger filled. So make sure to like look up all of that sort of stuff before you jump into these books. But this was the first mafia romance that I ever read, and I do think that it will be one of my top favorites ever, and it's definitely going to be one of the books that are in my top favorites of this year. So I highly recommend the entire series. Next up, on a very similar note, I have the Brutal Birthright series by Sophie Lark. So this is another mafia romance companion series. This is a collection of 6 books, and I currently have only read the first 3 books. I'm kind of taking it slow because they are companion books and I don't really want to like fly through them. I kind of want to like, you know, be able to have more to go to when I'm like in the mood for some more like Sophie Lark sort of writing. But basically this is kind of on a more relaxed level than the Maid series that I just talked about. This is still like, you know, book 1 is an arranged marriage. Book 2 is like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, kidnapping, romance, Stockholm Syndrome sort of thing. And then book 3 was just a really adorable romance that happened to have had a heist in it, which I thought was really, really fun. And I'm not really sure what the next ones are. Actually, no, the next book is, I'm pretty sure, a second chance romance. And then I'm not really sure what book 5 and 6 is. But basically, this is an amazing mafia romance. Something about Sophie Lark's writing is really easy to like fly through. I'm pretty sure I've read all 3 books that I've already read from this series, literally in like 1 or 2 sittings. I just finished them in one night. Like they're so easy to fly through. They're so easy to just like, I don't know, get consumed by, and they are so much freaking fun. So if you enjoyed the Maid series and you're looking for another thing very similar, I highly recommend the Brutal Prince series. And then if you read the Maid series and you're like, oh, this was a little bit dark and intense for me, so now I don't think I want to, you know, read the Brutal Birthright series, you're wrong, because this was a little bit more relaxed. It felt a little bit more normal than, you know, the regular mafia romances that are like deeply into like, you know, the mafia and their ways. Like this felt very normal, except it was a mafia read. So I didn't mean to confuse you there, but basically all I'm saying is read the Brutal Birthright series. Next up, I have the Sinner of Saints series by L.J. Shen. So I'm holding up book 1, but there are 3 more books that are part of this companion series. Book 1 is Vicious, and it is a bully romance. Book 2 is Ruckus, and it is a second chance romance. Book 3 is probably the steamiest from the entire companion series. It's called Scandalous, and it is an age gap romance. And then book 4 is called Bane, and it is, I don't even know how to explain it, but it's a really good book. It's kind of has a lot more trigger warnings than the rest of them. Like you're following this girl who kind of went through an extremely traumatic experience and is very depressed and like living in her own bubble. And this guy basically is paid to go and befriend her and kind of get her out of her funk. And then they end up having a romance. It's amazing. Basically, I love this entire series. It is definitely one of my favorites from the year. I'm not sure where it's yet going to land up on like, you know, my top favorite list, but basically it's definitely going to be in there. I absolutely loved this series. It is very steamy. It is very dark and like it's got all the vibes going on. I know that I've mentioned this book a lot this month. Like for some reason it keeps like making its way into a ton of my videos, but it's for a reason. Basically, I just love this series and I highly recommend it. And I'm just saying, if you end up reading it and then you're a big fan, there is a spin-off series about all of these people's children. They're in the All Saints High series, and you basically get to follow all the kids that you like slowly meet throughout the ends of each of these books. And then, you know, they basically get their own romance. So there's a lot to read. I highly recommend it. It's a great series, and that's all. Next up, I have the Dirty Air series by Lauren Asher. So I'm holding up the first book, but this is a collection of 4 books. They're all companion books. In each book, you are following a different romance, and you're basically following Formula One race car drivers. It is a great time. It's a sports romance, really hot guys, really cute girls, really fun adventures sort of thing all around the world because, you know, they're traveling from race car, you know, competition to race car competition sort of thing. And basically, I absolutely love this series. I currently have only read the first 2 books from this series and I thoroughly enjoy them, but I have heard that the 3rd and the 4th book are the better ones. Like every time like I see somebody who has read all 4 books, they always say that they loved book 3 and book 4 the most. So I'm very excited to continue on with this series in 2022, but I have read the first 2 books. I thoroughly enjoy them. They are a really fun time and I highly recommend it if you're into sports romances, if you're into race car driver romances, if you're into like, you know, just steamy reads in general. Next up, I have the Ravenhood series by Kate Stewart. Oh my God, one of my favorites from the year. This is definitely a book that is in the running for my top read of this year. But basically, this is a collection of 3 books. I'm holding up book 1, which is Flock. Book 2 is Exodus. And then book 3 is The Finish Line. And it's one storyline and it is absolutely crazy. This book and this story in general is definitely not for everyone, but if it is for you, oh my God, you will be obsessed. I can't even begin to explain what this story is about because you're supposed to be guessing the whole time. The main girl doesn't even know what's going on. So while you're reading this story, you're slowly finding out what the hell the story is actually about with her sort of thing. So I know that sounds very confusing. And the thing is like read the back of the book, you will be confused. But I can't tell you how the story starts out, even though it's going to like literally go all over the place and not be exactly what you expected. But you're basically following this girl who isn't very close to her father, but her father basically wants to give her her trust fund because he is very wealthy. He owns like this like Fortune 500 company or something. But his thing is that she has to come and work for his company for a year before she can inherit everything. So she basically moves to the town that her father lives in and she starts working at his factory plant of sorts. And when she gets there, she meets this guy and she ends up following him home and going to a party at his house. And that is where she meets all of his friends and his kind of like gang of sorts. He basically owned this like, you know, mechanic shop and he has all of these really weird and dark friends that are kind of like, you know, wrapped up in a mystery sort of thing. And she ends up getting close to, you know, that group of people. So, you know, she got close to like, you know, the people that everybody said, like, you know, stay away from them. They're bad news. You don't want to get involved with them sort of thing. But then obviously, you know, she gets involved with them and the story kind of takes off from there. So this is definitely one of the steamiest books that I read this year. I know that I said the club series was the steamiest, but now that I'm thinking about it, this might be the steamiest instead. But basically, it's a great series. If you haven't read it yet and you're into like weird, taboo, dark sort of stuff, you definitely should try this book out. Next up, I have the Offcampus series by Elle Kennedy. So this is a college hockey sports romance companion series. In the first 4 books, you're basically following 4 different romances of these 4 guys who are all on the hockey team together and happen to live in a house off campus. And they basically each get their own romance. So you start off with book 1, you meet Garrett and Hannah. They have this fake dating relationship sort of thing that turns into a lot more than that. And then, you know, you get to meet all of his friends, all the people that live in the house with him. And then each one of them slowly get their own romances. And basically, it's a great time. It is a very popular series. I highly recommend it. If you're into like college hockey sports romance stuff, this is definitely the series to check out if you haven't seen it already. And then if you're a huge fan of this, then you could read the Briar You series, which is its spin-off series where you're following 4 more romances. There's 4 books, 4 more romances, and you know, they're all part of the hockey team and they each get their own romance, and they're, you know, one's a brother's best friend's romance, one is a forbidden romance. Like there are a fake dating romance, you know, there's like so many different tropes in this. They're all super classic, super good, really good time. And the last book / series that I'm going to be recommending to you for this video is the Addicted / Calloway Sisters series by Kristen Becker-Ritchie. If you've been following me for the past like 2 months on Instagram or here on BookTube, then you basically know that I have been reading this for a really long time. I recently finished the entire 10-book series and I am going to be moving on to its spin-off series soon, but I'm taking a breather for like half a moment. But basically in this book / this series, it's a collection of 10 books and you are following 3 romances, 6 characters, and it's just absolutely amazing. In book 1, you basically start off with these 2 characters. They're Lily and Lo, and they basically both have these addictions. Lily is a sex addict and Lo is an alcoholic. And they've basically been fake dating each other for a couple of years so that they can live in their addictions and get their parents off their back. But they've been best friends like literally their whole life. They're inseparable, but they have these addictions, and you kind of start off the story getting to see where they are in life and, like, you know, seeing how they're fake dating. And obviously it's going to turn into an actual romance. And then throughout the first couple of books, you get to meet some other characters, and then they all end up getting their own romances too. And it builds up on each other. It is absolutely amazing. If you are interested in this series and you want to know a little bit more about like what it's about in detail and how to read it and all that sort of stuff, I have a video for you. I have the How to Read the Addicted / Calloway Sister series and everything you need to know about it. So if you're interested in that, I'll make sure it's linked down in the description below. But basically, this series is filled with a couple of trigger warnings as well as a ton of explicit sex scenes. So it's not necessarily a dark romance, but it does cover dark topics, and the steam in these books are so much better than I ever expected them to be. So I highly, highly recommend reading this series. And I know that it's very intimidating to, you know, get involved with a series that is technically 10 books long, but oh my God, will it be worth it? But anyway, that is all I have for you for the steamy romances that I read and absolutely loved this year. I'm curious to know if you have any steamy romance recommendations for me. I am always looking for good recommendations, so please leave me some comments down below with anything that you think I'd really enjoy reading. But basically, if you enjoyed watching this video, then please give it a thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed to my channel, please hit that subscribe button and make sure to come back tomorrow because a new video will be up. I'm in the middle of doing a Bookmas, 31 videos for the 31 days of December. So you come back tomorrow and a new video will be posted. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy reading.